So, hey everyone, here on the live and watching later on for the Fridays for Future YouTube series. So, our mission here at Fridays for Future is to create a space for youth to advocate for a better world and for a future that recognizes and implements Indigenous rights, uplifts marginalized voices and communities, and follows the principles of climate justice. So, my name is Courtney, and I'm going to be here with Greg, and we will be talking to you all today about the Global Week of Climate Action. But first, I will hand things off to Greg so we can talk about our land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Courtney. Hello, my name is Greg. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that the land which we're holding this online space is on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. The land from which I speak to you today is named Adobigok, the place of the alders in the Ojibwe language. Adobigok is uniquely situated along the Kobichenok Humber River watershed, which for over 12,000 years provided an integral connection for Indigenous peoples between the lakeshore of Ontario and the Lake Simcoe Georgian Bay region, connecting Turtle Island north and south. This land was part of Treaty 13A, dating from 1805, which annexed the remaining land along the shore of Lake Ontario between the land of the Toronto Purchase of 1787 and the Brand Tract Treaty of 1797. The previously mentioned nations are only a few in the many that have indigenously populated and been the guardians of these lands. We recognize that these nations have been compelled to leave their traditional lands through genocide and forced removal, with these actions still being acted out in a more secretive manner in this present day. The systems currently in place exacerbate and prolong these issues through behaviors such as ignoring Indigenous sovereignty and neglecting Indigenous communities. This acknowledgement is for the purpose of highlighting Indigenous issues and bringing the topics into the discussion. A land acknowledgement is only one step towards the eventual realities of reparation, reconciliation, and the acceptance of Indigenous sovereignty. The next step is to bring this land acknowledgement into our daily lives by having active solidarity with Indigenous communities where you listen, learn, and help when asked. The following questions are for self-reflection, and I hope everyone at home takes a moment to think about their own answers and translate that into your everyday life. Now, Courtney, how do you place yourself or reflect on what the land acknowledgement means to you?
For me, I think a land acknowledgement, like what we're doing today, it needs to go beyond just acknowledging our place on Indigenous lands and seeing how we can be better and dismantle colonialism in our day-to-day lives. I think that land acknowledgements have come a long way, but I think that we can take them even further and ask ourselves when we're doing land acknowledgement what we can do in those spaces to dismantle colonialism. So, for example, I went to Ryerson and we would have talks and we would have land acknowledgements. But as some people may know, like Egbert Ryerson was the founder of, or one of the founders of residential schools. So I think that we could have acknowledged that and done steps to actually do something about that, to do reparations in that sense. So I think it's beyond acknowledging the land and just taking steps to be able to reconcile some of our past actions.
Yeah, I think I fully agree with that. Because whenever my school started doing land acknowledgements, like, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
but they would never really talk about like the actual history of it or like how it's actually affecting Indigenous people today.
Yeah,
So land acknowledgements have come a long way, but it is an important thing to realize that we need to like actually take it into our daily lives and like change even the way we think about things.
exactly.
And then the second question, what intentions do you have to disrupt and dismantle colonialism beyond this territory acknowledgement?
I think for myself, first is learning about what those terms even mean. Some people may be even new to these terms, making sure that you learn what they truly mean and the how the systems that were in place after colonialism have impacted you or benefited you in any way, and then doing your part in whatever spaces you're in, whether it's just your personal like friends or in your education or in your job and your professional networks, to be able to call out when colonialism and just any kinds of forms of oppression are happening and being able to push whatever space you're in to be better. I think I'm going to make sure that when I'm into this new job now, that I'm going to make sure that we can do something about that in whatever industry that we're in.
Yeah, I think that's really like something important to remember that wherever you go, you need to be calling it out and dismantling it, even though you may be tired of talking about it all the time. It's
Mhm.
much more exhausting to live at the end of these systems. So
Sure.
we really need to work together to bring them down.
Mhm.
Um, and now we can get into the theme of this week. So this week's Let's Chat will be talking about the upcoming Global Week of Climate Action. Before we get into explaining what's going on next week and what we as an organization are planning for it, let's give a bit of history about the Global Week of Action and climate action itself. Just a brief synopsis. The global climate movement is very fresh, and I'd like to clarify that land defenders have been advocating for and actually managing the protection of the environment for centuries. So, by fresh movement, I mean it has gained traction among other global demographics. And the first Global Week of Climate Action was almost a full year ago, meaning that the upcoming week is the second of its kind. And last year, we gathered thousands of members of the community and we marched along Toronto streets, loudly proclaiming our protests to the government and its lack of action on climate change. But this year's event will look a little different due to COVID and the safety considerations around that. We will still be meeting in person, but we will all be distanced and masked. The reality of the climate crisis is that it's not going to go away. So our protests about our government's misguided priorities also cannot go away. And before we get into the theme questions, I'd just like to go over a little weekly update about what's going on. And in the past couple of weeks, the OPP have aggressively acted on an injunction placed over the front line that is 1492 Landback Lane. Over 27 people have been arrested, including Oneida journalist Carl Dockstader and Mohawk policy reacher Courtney Sky. The OPP have gone against their stated desire to continue an open and peaceful dialogue with the land defenders. This is an escalation of the situation by the OPP, which is just history repeating itself. These are real colonialist practices being done in front of our very eyes, and it's a matter of personal choice if you're just going to sit by and pretend it's not happening. Now, I strongly encourage you to go to the 1492 Landback Lanes Facebook page to learn about more. And they also have donations set up for any necessities and legal fees. And it'd be greatly appreciated if you would check it out. And then now we can get into the actual theme questions. So, Courtney, what is the week of what will the Global Week of Climate Action actually entail? What events are happening during the week and what event are we planning?
So the Global Climate Action Week includes various events, petitions, and initiatives that will push towards a just recovery. So we will publish the calendar that has a calendar document that has all the links and descriptions of all these initiatives in the YouTube description. So check them out and see which initiatives that you can get involved in. There's a lot of ones that you can do from home as well, just to make sure we're all inclusive and everyone can get involved. But just to get everyone excited, we will quickly go over some of the events that you can look forward to. So we will kick things off on Monday with a forum with amazing speakers from the education system on fighting for a safe reopening of schools. And then on Tuesday, September 22nd, is the day to tell your MPs about a livable recovery for all. So we suggest three main actions that you can take from home. So one is emailing your MPs, and the Facebook event link has a link on how you can find your representatives and templates and stuff for communication. Two, visit your MP's office in person and post a photo to social media tagging the movement. And we have all the tags and everything on the event. And three, tweet your MP directly and using the hashtags provided in the event. Also on the 22nd of September, there is a discussion on Canadian and African voices for regenerative agriculture as a climate solution. So this dialogue draws links between food, farming, and climate and highlights the potential for regenerative agriculture to capture carbon, replenish our water supply, reverse desertification, balance our climate, align humanity with our environment, and feed the world with healthy foods. That's really, really cool. That evening on the 22nd at 7 to 8:30 p.m. is a screening and discussion of Women Hold Up the Sky. And for those who cannot attend, or even if you are attending the climate strike on the 25th, we will have a Just Recovery Zap, which is an online youth-led collective action demanding climate action now. So we will be emailing, calling, tweeting, and commenting at politicians in the Ontario provincial and federal government. So really get involved with that. I think that social media and stuff is like one of the biggest ways that we've been able to make all of this action thus far. It's a really huge tool. So get involved with that for sure. So now for the next question, which is what is the Global Climate Action Week for? What's the reason people are organizing all these events? And what is the theme of our global climate strike? So the Global Climate Action Week is taking place at a really critical time in history and is a call to action aiming to draw more attention to social injustice, economic inequality, and the environmental crisis that have always been present in our society, but have really been coming to the forefront of our collective knowledge due to the consequences of COVID-19 and the environmental disasters that are happening around the world that we're all getting way more aware of. So as we discussed in the Just Recovery YouTube Live that went more in depth into the reasons as to why we need a just recovery in each of those recovery areas, the health of a system is reliant on the health of all of its parts. And we need to recognize the interconnectedness between economies, society, which is people, social dynamics, social structures, and then our institutions created by people, and it's all nested within the natural environment. So economies are just simply a series of exchanges created by people within societies that are further nested within our natural environment. Therefore, marginalization and oppression of people in the environment on which the economy and society rely will only cause more damage to everything. A destroyed environment and the pitfalls of economy and other struggles caused by actions that go against natural systems and are based on exploitation and unequal opportunities. So our global climate strike is happening in cities all across Canada and demands that we utilize this period of unrest and general disaster, learn from it and those experiencing its impacts, and build better in a green just recovery that's foundation is built on environmental integrity, resilient economies, and wealth equity and social justice. The demands of the strike align with the principles of a green just recovery and fall within the recovery areas we outlined in last week's discussion, called the Roadmap to a Just Recovery. And it will also be further discussed in tonight's Just Recovery and Teach-In panel discussion, which you can find more details about in the Fridays for Future Instagram. So just to go over the demands, so we require that our governments invest in people and not corporations. So make the wealthiest 1% pay their fair share, create millions of good green jobs, and provide universal and accessible healthcare, housing, transit, and education for all. It enshrines food security and clean water for all as well. The second kind of pillar is a just recovery will also dismantle racism and colonialism in all its forms. So it will uphold Indigenous rights and sovereignty, including implementing UNDRIP, so UNDRIP, into binding law and returning land back to Indigenous communities. It guarantees permanent residency status for all. It defunds the police, reallocating this money towards social services with the long-term goal of abolition. A just recovery will also have governments and corporations treating the climate emergency like the emergency that it is and achieve zero emissions by 2030, ends the construction of new fossil fuel infrastructure, implements a climate lens on every policy decision, budget, and infrastructure investment, invests 5% of Canada's annual GDP in a just transition, guarantees jobs or support for oil and gas workers and other carbon-dependent industry workers after the decarbonization of the economy, transitions to a green economy, pushes industry regulations and standards, and pressures wealthier countries to meet targets limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, while increasing financial support for countries in the global south and others hit hardest by the climate crisis, so we're able to collectively as a global community reach this goal. So now that we've gone over what it is and why we're doing it, let's talk about what does safety of our event look like with COVID-19.
Thank you. So first and foremost, masks. The use of masks are mandatory and essential even when physically distancing. We will encourage attendees ahead of time to bring and use masks at the event. Non-medical masks, clothes, face coverings, or medical masks are recommended. However, as we are recommending not to use single-use elements like just the toss-away masks if you can. And masks should allow for easy breathing. They should fit securely to the head with ties or ear loops, maintain their shape, and be comfortable and not frequent to adjust. There should be no gaps, no nothing, so you can keep all your germs to yourself. Masks should not be placed on babies or children younger than 2 years old, or anyone who has trouble breathing, or anyone who is unconscious, incapacitated, or otherwise unable to remove the mask without assistance or consent to having the mask put on them. At the event, we will have sanitization stations where hand sanitizer will be placed around. There will be people going around giving hand sanitizer to others. And we also recommend that protesters do bring their own personal hand sanitizer just for ease. There'll also we've been communicating and talking about these safety protocols on our social media and to any media that we've been talking to completely. We've been promoting the use of personal practices such as frequent hand hygiene, avoiding touching your face, respiratory etiquette, and also we've been promoting physical distancing by reinforcing not using handshakes and other greetings like that.
Do the elbow.
At the event, the elbow. At the event, crosses will be installed to keep 2 meter separation between attendees on the floor/sidewalk. Organizers will broadcast regular announcements on reducing the spread of COVID-19 on public address systems, encouraging attendees to keep social distance and to avoid touching their face, nose, or mouth. We also are reinforcing a no sharing food or drink policy. And to do so, we encourage each attendee to bring their own reusable water bottle and snacks. We also say that if any organizer or attendee has been tested for COVID-19 and turns out positive or shows any symptoms similar to COVID-19 within the past 14 days prior to the event, we please ask you to not come to the physical event and rather join us at home on the online event. And now I'm just going to talk quickly about how the logistics process has kind of changed with COVID and how that's affected its difficulty. So our usual event would be something like a rally where a large group of people gather around one stage, or a march where large groups of people gather around to walk loudly in one direction. However, whenever we plan an event, we're always thinking of how to make it safe and comfortable for those participating. Community safety in mind, we decided that we had to immediately rule out our usual event styles. So the whole process had to be focused around how we could gather people in the community together safely so we can protest in these unprecedented times. And it's definitely added a lot of headache to the process, because before it was really easy because you could just kind of tell people where to show up, and then you didn't really have to worry about them distancing from each other or having to wear masks or things like that, or sanitizing. So there's just a lot of like little background stuff that we really had to think about. But it's okay, because community safety is one of our #1 priorities at Fridays for Future, because there's no point in going to an event if you're going to be unsafe at it. And then finally, Courtney, how can people get involved with our actions, and how can people keep updated?
Yeah, so I hope everyone's excited about the Global Week of Climate Action, and I hope to see some of you there on the 25th at Bay and Wellesley. So to keep updated with everything going on for this initiative, future actions, and just looking at our amazing infographics and information put together by our volunteers, you can check out our social media platforms. So our Instagram is at Fridays for Future TO, and we have a Facebook and a website with that same name. And you can contact us by email at fridays4, like the 4, futureto@gmail.com. social media, again, is an amazing tool for collaboration and collective action. So it's really a driving force for the Just Recovery. So we'd love to hear from you and see what you are doing or come across in your own lives in regards to any of the topics that we bring up. Send us pictures, tag us in stories, especially at the Climate March. We'd love to see that. We're all in this together, and the more we collaborate, the more successful we'll be in this movement. So thank you, Greg, for joining me for today's talk and for posting. We're going to post all of the links in the description below, like that calendar that we had mentioned. And thank you to all for joining us for our weekly strikes, and see you next Friday.
See you next Friday.